This is Seth Lippincott with my version of the Trico. Before we begin, let's take a look at what a Trico can actually look like. Take notice to the tail and how it's separated. Also take notice to the thickness of the body. And let's take a look at the shape of the wings. Keep this in the back of your head when we begin to tie our fly. What we're going to do is we're going to begin to wrap our thread around the hook shank until we get to the bend of the hook. And we're not going to trim the tag end like we normally would. And what we're going to do is we're going to ball up just a tiny bit of thread so that when we put on our tail, the tail will lift up slightly, and then the tag end that we left, we can separate the tail, like the microfibers, to make a V shape. The tail is going to be a little bit longer than your average nymph, if you can get a scale from that. And from watching my other videos, I tell you about how long your tail should be. Now we take this tag end and we weave it through the tails, the microfibers that we just tied in, and we separate it so it looks like a V. And once you think you have that down set, you tie it off using the pinch technique. Give it a couple wraps, and this way it's nice and secure. Trim your tag end and the rest of your microfibers. Now for this next step, what we're going to be using is black foam. And what you want to do is we're going to want to trim this black foam nice and thin, but not too thin. This is going to help us keep the fly floating when it's actually in the water. So what we do here is we take a nice thin piece of black craft foam. You can get this anywhere. You can get this craft stores, Walmart. And we cut a manageable piece. You cut that in half. You cut the next piece in half. You cut the next piece in half. As thin as you think it should be. The body is not very thick. It's somewhat thin. So you don't want too much foam, but you got to realize that this foam it'll smush down when you begin to tie it onto the hook. So now we have a nice manageable piece here. And what we're going to do is take this very end and trim it to a point. And that's going to help us taper our body when we attach this. So now we measure up our foam, and making sure that the pointed end is towards the tail, we attach the foam using the pinch technique. Measure it up, tie it in, give it a couple of wraps, make sure that this isn't going to move on us, and slowly tie down that foam until it gets to the very point. And now you'll notice the body looks very sloppy right now, so we're going to want to touch this up by continually wrapping thread until you feel that the body is actually tapered the way it's supposed to be. And now you can see it's starting to look like a tapered body. Give this a couple more wraps, and what we're going to do is fold the foam piece back a little bit, tie that off, and what that's going to do is help us further taper this body. So give this a nice little snip, give a couple more wraps, and we're basically ready for our next step now. Now for our next step, I haven't seen anybody use what I'm about to show you, so this is my little trick. A plastic grocery bag. what you can do is you can cut off these little tag ends that are normally on the plastic bag, and that's a nice start to our wings. And what we're going to want to do is we're going to crumble this up, and this is going to make our wings look very realistic. And there's already wings that you can purchase online and maybe at retail stores, and they're kind of expensive, but I found that plastic bags are a little bit cheaper, so use what you can. So what we're doing is continually crumbling these up, and this is going to give our future wings this very nice look. So now we bend this in half, give it a crease, and we're going to cut this in half. And at this point, the wings are still too big. So we're going to trim this down. And following the curve of what you see here, we're going to just shorten everything up. And at this point, I feel that these wings are starting to look pretty good, but it still has a couple of harsh looking and sharp corners. So we want to definitely round these off a little bit. And we can fix everything up at the end when we decide to trim everything up, make it look pretty. So what we do is unfold our wings here. And I like to make a little cut in the middle, and this is going to help us attach our wings a little bit easier. You don't have a very thick piece to work with then. You see how it separates a little bit there? You don't want to cut too much because it'll tear right through. Just a little triangle. And now when we go to attach these wings, you want to separate the wings that they're not folded up. And then using the pinch technique again, you tie these on very, very loosely. Not to the point where they're going to be flying around on you and twisting on the hook shank. It's just you want to make sure it's loose enough where you can manipulate it and really put it in the position that you want. So now, with this attached, we twist, and what this is doing is this is going to set us up for a figure 8 method. So now, instead of them being the wings being parallel to the fly, they're now horizontal. Make sure everything is in line here, and then slowly begin to do the figure 8 method here. Nice and smooth. And once you have a couple wraps in, it's going to be a little bit easier to continually use the figure 8 to wrap this in. And now what I'm going to be doing is adding just a tiny amount of black dubbing. And what this is going to do is this is going to make our fly basically complete. Make sure our wings are nice and good. And what I did was I folded them down just a little bit just to make sure that they were going to go down the right way before I put my dubbing on. If they tend to stay up a little bit, you're going to want to continually do the figure 8 method, and this is going to flatten your wings down, because what we're going for here is the spinner version of the Trico. So we add in our black dubbing, twist it onto our thread. And using the figure 8 method once again, we begin to make our fly look that much better. Give this a couple wraps. And you're going to notice that with mine, I have a couple of stray fibers that are sticking up from the dubbing, and just want to snip those. If you have a couple, it's no big deal because this dubbing will get wet and everything will mesh together. And now what I'm doing is I'm finishing our fly with the whip finish tool. Give it 3, 4, 5 wraps. Snip off the tag end. And now I want to concentrate on my wings. Now these are a little too big, so what I'm going to do is trim these up just a little bit, make sure everything's nice and rounded, and really give it the appearance of what the Trico is really supposed to look like. And what we're going to do here is we're just going to push our wings down to make it really look like the spinner. Now with all the foam and this plastic that we have on this fly, if you use the right amount of foam, this fly will float. And you can test it out, put it in some water, see what it even looks like, and see how long it floats. This is Seth Lippincott with my natural Trico.